Welcome back everyone to the course. In this video, we're going to implement the sounds that you have created with Noah into our game. So we have got our sound clips imported in Unity inside of our sounds folder. Let's start off by adding the fireball sound to our player's projectiles. Each time the player instantiates a projectile, we're going to instantiate an empty game object, and it will be that object there that will play the fireball sound. We're doing this because if we directly play the fireball sound on the projectile, it will give us some weird sounds when the projectile destroys itself before the sound has the time to finish playing. So I'm going to create an empty game object called fireball sound, and I'll turn it into a prefab. We're going to add to it the audio source component. This component will enable our fireball to play a sound. The very first thing we need to fill in is the audio clip variable. In other words, what sound do we want this object to play? So in this case, we want the fireball sound to play, so we'll drag and drop that clip onto the slot. The next important variable is the play on awake. This variable will control if the sound will play when the object gets instantiated. So make sure that it is checked because that is exactly what we want. Moving on, we have got the loop variable, and this one needs to be unchecked in our case because we only want the fireball sounds to play one single time. Two more important variables are the volume and pitch variables. The volume variable will dictate how loud or low the sound will play, and the pitch variable will modify the squeakiness of the sound. So you'll have to play around with these until you find something that you like. But I'll just leave them at their default values. So now we'll go inside of the projectile script and we'll create a public GameObject variable called soundObject. Then inside of the start function, we will instantiate the soundObject at the position and rotation of the projectile. Now save the script and of course drag and drop the GameObject into its slot. Before we're going to test this out, we're going to create and add to the fireball soundObject a C# script called destroyer. This script will be in charge of destroying the object after a couple seconds to ensure the scene doesn't get cluttered up with game objects. Inside of the script, I'll create a public float variable called lifetime, and then inside of the start function, I'll just destroy this game object after the lifetime has passed. Save the script, give a value like 3 or 4 to the destroyer, and then press the play button to test it out. Okay, so now if you press the play button, you should hear that each time we instantiate a projectile, the fireball sound effect is playing. If you don't hear anything for some reason, make sure the mute audio tab is unchecked. Of course, now just repeat this process for each different player projectile that you have created. Okay, with that done, we are now going to add a sound when an enemy dies. And for this one here, we are going to want to play a random sound from our 4 different enemy death sound effects. Alright, so instead of adding an audio source component to our enemies and having to detect when the enemy dies before playing the sound effects, we are simply going to add an audio source to the enemy death effect, which already spawns when the enemy dies. So we're going to add the audio source right now. So for this one here, we aren't going to fill in the audio clip variable because remember, we're going to pick a random one and we're going to do that with a script. Before creating that script, I'm also going to uncheck play on awake because again, we're going to play the sound manually with a script. Okay, so let's create and add that C# script onto our enemy death effect and we'll call it something like random sounds. Now let's open it up inside of Visual Studio. First of all, we need a private audio source variable which I'll call source. Then we're also going to create a public audio clip array called clips which will store all of our potential enemy death effects. Inside of our start function, we will first assign to the source variable the component of type audio source that is attached to our particle death effect. After that, we will create an integer variable called random number, which will be equal to a random number between 0 and the clips.length. Once that is done, we simply need to set the source.clip equal to our clips array with an index of random number. Last thing to do is just to play the actual sound, and we'll do so by typing source.play. Awesome, we can now save our script and go back inside of Unity. Now let's drag and drop our 4 enemy death sound effects onto the clips array. Perfect, so each time we kill an enemy, a random sound effect gets played. Of course, add the audio source and the random sound script on every enemy inside of the prefabs folder. How about we now add the pickup sound effects? We would like it to play when the pickup gets instantiated and also when the player actually picks it up. So for when it gets instantiated, we'll simply add an audio source component to our heart pickup, for example, and we will just drag and drop the pickup sound for the audio clip variable. And then we'll make sure that the play on awake is checked and that looping is unchecked. And that's it. Now for when the player actually picks up the heart, we'll add an audio source component onto the pickup effect, just like we did for the enemies when they die. I'll just need to drag and drop the same pickup sound effect. Again, just repeat this process for all of your pickups. Alright, the last sounds that we need to implement are the bosses. So for him, we're going to want to play a random sound from the 3 boss sound effects that we have here every so often. Let's add an audio source component to the boss. And as we're going to be controlling his sounds with a script, we will not fill in the audio clip variable and we will uncheck the play on awake variable. Let's now create and add a C# script onto the boss called boss sounds, double click on it and let's start coding it out. This script is going to be pretty similar as the random sound script, so we'll actually copy and paste what we did in the previous script onto this one. So now we'll need 2 more variables. One public float variable called time between sound effects and a private float called next sound effect time. This pattern of creating timers in C# should be second nature for you by now. Then we'll change the start function into a update function. Now we'll also need a start function just to assign the source variable to be equal to the audio source component that is attached to our boss. Okay, so now just before we choose our random number and play the sound effects, we will check if the current time in the game is greater or equal than the next sound effect time variable. If it is, then I will run the code and of course we'll set the next sound effect time variable to be equal to the current time in the game plus the time between sound effects variable. And that's it. I'll now drag and drop my 3 audio clips onto the clips array and then choose a time between sound effects. I'll put something like 5 seconds. Alright, so have fun playing your game and enjoy the cool sound effects that we have added, which makes the game feel that much better. Great work everybody. That marks the end of this video, and I'll see you in the next one where we will create a health bar for the boss. I'll see you over